have two full-time jobs. I'm here representing the most important job, which is being the father of two beautiful girls who are part of the Boston Public School system. I will be serving as your moderator this morning, so it's my pleasure to welcome you all who are watching us on live stream via Boston City TV, and those of you here in the room with us this morning. We really thank you for being here for this important discussion. The first of 4 public forums that will be happening today. First, as I said, I'd like to welcome all of you here. I also like to thank Mayor Walsh for allowing us the opportunity to have this public discourse and forum. Also, sincere thank you to the search committee led by Alex Oliver Davila and her co-chair, Dr. Keith Motley. Our job has been made easier by the hard work you and the search committee have already put in place. You spent significant amount of hours narrowing the candidate field from 39 to the 3 finalists that you will see in the next 3 days. So thank you for all the hard work. I think we are pleased to have the opportunity to connect and learn more and have a public weigh-in about the 3 final candidates. My job is to keep this panel on time and make sure that if there's an opportunity for the public to ask questions, there actually are going to be Boston Public School staff members walking around with cards. Liz Sullivan, who's been absolute wonderful help to us in this process, will be handing out cards. If you have any questions that you want me to get to before the end of the panel, I will try to get to 1 or 2 questions before the end of the panel. So, bienvenida a Boston de nuevo, Ms. Marie Izquierdo. Welcome to Boston again. It's a pleasure to have you here. With that, I'll introduce our panelists today. We have 4 great community partners and panelists who are with me today. Sitting to my immediate right is Dr. Vanessa Calderon Rosado, the Chief Executive at IBA, Inquilinos Boricuas en Acción. Sitting next to her is Anthony Benoit, who is Benjamin Franklin Institute of Technology President. Did I get your title correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
To my immediate left, we have Abdul Hussein from ASEDON, which is the African Community Economic Development Organization. And next to him, we have Caitlin Gaffney, who is a teacher at the Tobin K-8 school, and also representing today the Boston Teachers Union. So before we start, I'd like to give just a brief introduction to our audience about Mrs. Marie Izquierdo. I'm reading straight from her professional bio, just the first paragraph. She has many accomplishments, but just want to give you an idea. If you do want to learn more, please make sure to visit the Boston Public Schools website, where you have the full bios, resumes, and backgrounds of the candidates, everything about the process. I'd like to remind those of you in the audience and also on live stream that we actually have an email where we love to hear from you, and the Boston School Committee and the Search Committee will love to hear from you. And that email is superintendentsearch@bostonpublicschools.org. So at the end of each of the panels, there will be an opportunity to send in an email with comments, questions, suggestions, etc., about either the process or further observations about the candidates, and that information will be collected and reviewed by the committee after each of the 4 forums that you'll have today. So with that said, let's get started. I am on a timer, and I'm going to read quickly Marie Izquierdo's bio, which is she's an innovative educator with more than 25 years of experience in school transformation, a child of working-class immigrants and an English language learner herself. She's steadfast in her efforts to expand educational opportunity for all students and provide each and every child with a world-class education. Growing up, school was her happy place. With teachers supporting and encouraging her, she focuses on building the same supportive environment in every school, placing equity, opportunity, and innovation at the forefront of her values and actions. Ms. Maria Izquierdo is currently the Chief Academic Officer for Miami-Dade County Public Schools, the nation's fourth largest school system, which serves more than 350,000 students and employs 53,000 teachers and staff. With that said, we'll give the opportunity to Mrs. Izquierdo to begin with an opening statement before we get into our questions. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you to all of you, particularly for spending time with me today. And this is a very important process, and I truly value the time and commitment that community members are giving to this effort. And I'm also very thankful to the search firm as well as to the search committee, who has really put in a lot of time to make sure that an appropriate and right decision is made for the children of Boston. So thank you for being so warm in your welcome. This is about my fourth trip, I believe, to this great city, and I'm super excited about having a conversation with you about how together we can make Boston Public Schools the preeminent school district in America. I am Marie Izquierdo, Maria Luisa Izquierdo, if you would like to know my legal name. I do go by Marie. I have been going by Marie since I was very, very little. And I am a lifelong educator. I've been in education my entire life. I've been in Miami my entire life. I'm sure we'll have some conversations about that as well. And I've been a teacher, an assistant principal, a director, and central office person. And so I've gone through this whole continuum of seeing how our work affects children and communities. I've had a front row seat to that and a very proud participant in that process in Miami-Dade. But what the public doesn't know about me, it's not in my resume, and so I'd like to share with you this morning is a little bit of the personal side. So I am a wife. I've been married. My husband will keep me straight, but I believe 29 years in June. I have 3 children. 2 are adults. I have a 23-year-old son who on May 3rd will be graduating from the University of Florida with a master's degree in accounting. I have a 21-year-old daughter who's in communications and getting a minor in computer science. And I have a 15-year-old freshman at home. And so that's a little bit about my family. As a child, I am a first generation American. My parents came to this country from Cuba with their parents. They were working class immigrants, and I was an English language learner myself. I am the daughter of a single mother. I was raised by my mom, who worked multiple jobs. She divorced my dad, or my parents were divorced rather, when I was a toddler. So I understand the struggles that many of our students here in Boston have in terms of broken home, maybe not a traditional family unit, and what that entails. My mother learned English in America and didn't necessarily understand the process of schooling or the system of schooling. I navigated it myself, but the one thing that she did inculcate in me is the importance of schooling as a ticket to prosperity, the ticket to breaking the wealth gap that existed in my community and affording me great opportunities to do good for other children in turn. And so I think that for me is really what drives, I know that that's what drives my passion to do this work. I believe that coming from a community such as Little Havana, and then being able to go back to that community and serve as its principal, a principal in Little Havana at Henry Flagler Elementary, really gave me just this moral obligation to do right by children in communities that are impoverished and that frankly don't see a way out. And I hope that through my words and my actions and the children that I've touched along the 28 years, I've taught children to aspire to do great things and to really believe in the sense of opportunity that can be provided to them. And we'll talk a little bit probably about that more in your questions, but that is, as Horace Mann said, the great equalizer of the conditions of men. I believe that in my bones, and I want to be an instrument for that, a vehicle for that, not only for the children that I've served thus far, but for the children and families that I will serve moving forward. School was my happy place, as Paul mentioned. I say that frequently when I speak publicly because I had a lot of things going on at home. And so when I went to school is where I actually thrived. And I thrived because the teachers that I had believed in me, gave me a lot of confidence in me, raised my self-esteem, but they pushed me. They pushed me to levels that I didn't think I would be able to achieve at. And because of them and because of other opportunities that were afforded to me, such as the Pell Grant, which is a federal grant for students that are of low income, I was able to attain my college education. And because of that, I'm the first in my family to earn a college degree, the first to own her own home, and the first to be able to have the luxury of traveling abroad, all because I had access and opportunity to education. And so as an educator, my North Star has always been to build those opportunities for other children, to provide them the access, opportunity, and support that they need so that they can achieve the American dream. And so I'm so looking forward to your questions and to kind of digging into that a little bit deeper. Thank you so much for your time.
Great. Thank you, Maria Luisa, for providing that personal context and that professional context as well. Very important as we get into the process. So without further ado, we'll get going, and I'll ask Dr. Vanessa Calderon to ask the first question.
Thank you, Paul, and very nice to meet you, Ms. Izquierdo. Welcome to Boston. Boston is a world-class city, as you know, but it's also a very parochial place, and it has a reputation of, a long-standing reputation of being a hard nut to crack. Plus, it's colder than Miami, so a little bit colder than Miami. So with that context in place in terms of, being a newcomer to Boston and Massachusetts, can you give us a sense of what would be your 100-day plan to engage, communicate, and connect with parents, with teachers, and with the at-large community, including the business community?
Sure. Thank you so much, Vanessa. So I would probably submit to you that my 100-day plan has already begun, in that this process has afforded me an opportunity to speak to folks that are either in front of the scenes or behind the scenes as to decision-making and context in Boston, the city of Boston. And so I feel that I've kind of started some of that work already. However, in my first 100 days, there's a lot of work to be done, and a lot of folks that would want to speak to me, and a lot of folks that I want to speak to. And so I would lean on the school committee to make sure that I have access and that I am reaching out to the most pivotal players that are affecting the circumstances and the lives of children in our classrooms. For me, that starts in the schools themselves. So clearly making sure that I am sitting with focus groups of teachers, but not only teachers, staff members at schools that ultimately play a vital role in the culture of our schools is very important, and also its leaders. I have seen not so good launches of superintendents where they fail to make that initial connection and that long-standing relationship building with school leaders and teachers. So for me, that's the bread and butter of what we do each and every day at BPS. Having said that, making sure that I get to know rather quickly the strengths and opportunities for improvement of the folks that are serving in the central office, the folks that are supporting the work in our schools, hearing from them and having them in turn tell me who are the players that we need to make sure are coming to the table. In addition to that, the business community is an entity that is vitally important. In my first 100 days, I would, if we don't have one already, I would set up a business advisory council. My current supervisor, did that immediately when he became superintendent, and I've seen the power of that, making sure that we grow deep roots with the business community, understanding the needs of the business community, and then building programs to support the needs of the business community. We know that not all children will necessarily go to college. Not all of them will. And if any candidate sits here and tells you that they will, I differ on that. We need to make sure that students have multiple pathways to college, career, and life readiness, and that includes workforce development as well, and the business community is integrally important in that regard. whether the children are graduating with industry certifications that they may take with them to post-secondary institutions. But that is really, really important. In addition to that, the parents in the community are vitally important. I understand that the schools have parent advisory councils. I'd like to meet with heads of those parent advisory councils and understand where they see are the biggest challenges for Boston Public Schools and how the central office, the superintendent, and the school committee can support them in achieving their goals and making sure that their children have the highest quality education possible, regardless of zip code. So the parents, to me, are very important. In addition to that, the students, I don't know if I mentioned the students, but the students, having students at the table, one of the things that I've been doing in the last year or so is whenever we have events in the community, making sure that I make myself available, almost like a pop-up shop, if you will. So if we have, like, for instance, we host a STEAM expo where we have like 7,000 parents, community members, because the kids are putting up their science experiments and their projects. And so I have a pop-up shop that I put up where I have staff that invites parents and students alike to come in and talk about different topics. And those topics, they rotate. So we could be talking about technology in the classroom, or we can be talking about homework loads, or whatever the case, choice programming. And so I've done that now a couple of times, and that's something that I would certainly do as a superintendent. In addition to that, besides having, I would want to know what are the standing advisory committees that exist at the central office, whether we have an advisory committee for students with disabilities, parents, and stakeholders in that realm, whether we have a business advisory committee, whether we have an advisory committee for our students that are English language learners. I know that those are two subgroups that need a whole lot of focus and nurturing in Boston Public Schools. And maybe an advisory council on the arts and languages, whatever those high priority topics are for the district, to bring people to the table. And then in addition to that, along those formal kind of structures, I would want to have I believe Superintendent Paisan did this, and that is having almost like a kitchen cabinet. So a cabinet of confidential advisors through a cross-section of the industry, parent, student, business people alike, that can tell me, hey, Marie, that wasn't such a good idea, and you should be coming at it this way. And then, of course, also involving the faith-based community and making sure that the faith-based community has a seat at the table and is informing the decision of central office and of the superintendent.
Right. Thank you for that
Thank you.
response. Detailed plan for first 100 days, busy first 100 days, for sure. Anthony.
Red.
Very busy. Good morning, Mrs. Izquierdo. Thank you for
Morning.
speaking with us this morning. As you know, the Boston Public Schools continue to suffer from significant opportunity gaps across race, academic background, language, neighborhood, alternate abilities, even student interests and affinities. I'm wondering what you see as your role as superintendent in closing those gaps.
I'm so excited to be answering that question. Having studied Boston Public Schools, there are several challenges, but I think that that's probably the biggest challenge that Boston Public Schools has before it today. And I feel that my experience and also just my innate desires professionally kind of really lean into that work. And so I'll tell you a couple of things that maybe to answer your question best is to give you some examples of how we're doing that in Miami-Dade and some of the practices, even though I won't come with a preconceived set of, strategies, some of the practices that will inform the body of work of my team and I. Primarily and very often ignored, frankly, in the conversations around the achievement gap is this standards alignment piece. And educators really understand that, non-educators not so much. But I submit to you that one of the most important levers that the school district, or any school district for that matter, can pull to make sure that we have a world-class education in every zip code, quality schools, is to make sure that students are being pushed and that students have access to standards that are at their grade level. And I think that that is something that now school districts are kind of waking up to across our country. But that is, for me, the primary lever. It's maybe not such a sexy lever to the community, but that is really where the rubber meets the road. And so for the viewing audience, maybe a good place to start to kind of wrap their heads around that would be the opportunity gap, which is a report that came out from the TNTP, the New Teacher Project, last year. And that report is really enlightening in that it shows that students have huge, big dreams, right? If you ask them how many you're gonna go to college, 90-some% of them are gonna say, I'm going to college, I'm going to college. And students work very, very hard. If you visit our classrooms across this country, really, you'll see students working hard. The question is, what are they working hard at? And what are the expectations that are being provided to those students on the work that they're actually doing? So what the TNTP report found was that 88% of the time, I want to say, the students were doing the work. They were actually engaged. So when they visited classrooms, they visited across 4 different districts, thousands of lessons that they observed. And the students were engaged. So someone walks into the classroom without a whole lot of pedagogical knowledge, and they'll say, oh, this is a great classroom. Kids are all engaged, check. But when you looked at what the students were engaged in, only 71% of them were actually completing the assignment. When you looked at the actual assignment, what the assignment was asking for, only 17% of those assignments were on grade level. So kids come with these huge, big dreams, and then we as adults kind of let them down. And we let them down for a myriad of reasons. Sometimes we let them down because we want, as educators, we want to help children. We want children to have a sense of success. And so we want to give them little wins in the classroom, and we want to make sure that they feel good about themselves. And so we tend to water down the curriculum. And to me, that's a disservice to children, right? And so making sure that in the classroom, the students are being met with on-grade level work and being pushed to their maximum capacity is really a huge lever when it comes to the equity agenda. In fact, if you look at the amount of time that students spend in this report on assignments that are basically non-grade level, it's about 6 months, I want to say. 6 months of the school year is spent doing things that are not attributed to grade level work. And so some might say, well, so big deal, but they're getting good grades. The big deal is that we'll graduate them and we'll give them a piece of paper, and that piece of paper will not serve them very, very well when only 38% of them are able to complete within 6 years in the post-secondary setting. And so this piece of paper becomes just that. It doesn't become really a ticket to college and career and life readiness. And more so, what happens is that the children become eligible, they're college eligible, but they're not really college ready. And so we need to have that conversation. Other drivers for equity, and I have such a huge body of work here that I apologize if I'm a little long-winded, but I'll try to be brief, is expansion of early childhood. So in Boston, I've seen a lot. Even, I'm reading a book called 10 Years of Urban Reform. This book was written in 2007. It's a Boston study. And a lot of the same challenges that you have before you today were challenges in 2007. And so this notion of expanding early childhood is really important to me. When you look at that 2007 book, there's this whole context around redesigning high schools. 2007. We're in 2019, we're still talking about redesigning high schools. So something needs to be said about that, right? And while I believe very strongly that we need to redesign high schools, I think that's too late. So I think that we need to start early. And now usually when you interview superintendents or when you appoint a superintendent, they're kind of, they pivot towards the high school because they don't know how long they're gonna be there, right? They don't know how long they're gonna be in a district, so they go for that short game. I submit to you that it is vitally important that whoever you hire is committed to the long-term game, because your bread and butter is in that K-3 space and your birth to 2 space. And I applaud Mayor Walsh for his investments in pre-K. That is going to give huge yields, not tomorrow, but in years to come. Accelerating students from English language learner categories and reclassifying them and making sure they get into gen ed as quickly as possible while they're supported, I think is a huge equity lever. And expanding advanced academic programming, and BPS has done some of that already. It's working through that. And just, I can go on and on. We can talk about providing students with devices to kind of level and eliminate digital deserts when they go home, that they don't have access to the internet. Inclusion efforts, which I'm sure you're gonna ask me about later, is also a huge equity lever that this district needs to continue to push against. And the truth of the matter is, if you look at my record, you will see that since 2011, when you look at graduation, and graduation is graduation, right? Because you want to look at graduation and you want to look at college persistence. But when you look at the percent of students that are graduating in Miami-Dade because of all these levers and others, you will find that our English language learners and our African-American students have closed their graduation gap in half. If you look at our economically disadvantaged and our students with disabilities, they have closed their graduation gap by 2/3. In fact, our economically disadvantaged students are just 3 percentage points away in terms of graduation rate to their non-economically disadvantaged peers. And that's how you do that work.
Thank you, Maria Luisa. I'm going to move to Kaylin in the interest of time for the next question.
My question has to do with how you see your role as an advocate and protector of the Boston Public Schools. Over the years, our schools have suffered repeated and more devastating cuts. Since I began at the Tobin School 19 years ago, we've lost our librarian, student support coordinator, shared social worker, school resource officer, assistant principals, student programs, content coaches for teachers, could never afford a guidance counselor, and will again be cut to one special educator to serve all of our students on IEPs and students on IEPs from Mission Grammar, the neighboring Catholic school. You may be aware that 49% of Boston city land is occupied by nonprofits. And since nonprofits don't pay property taxes, the city has the pilot program, Payments in Lieu of Taxes. The city's largest institutions have defaulted on upwards of $77 million in payments, monies that could be coming back into our schools. We've had a lot of upheaval recently with school closures, building shifts, even recently voting to turn a vacant school building back over to the city. So my question to you is, in your role as superintendent, what would your position be as an advocate and defender of the Boston Public Schools and the resources that we have and the resources that we've lost?
Thank you, Caitlin. That's a long question. I'll try to make sure that I answer it. So I will tell you that as your superintendent, I would be the biggest cheerleader for Boston Public Schools, number one. I have a pretty big mouth, and I tend to use it when I need it. I have lobbied in Tallahassee. I have sat before task forces that at the state level that are cutting resources to schools. I think there is room for that in Boston. I know the state of Massachusetts rate of investment in our school district has decreased over time. I want to say from 20 to 4% or something like that, or 6%, which I think is criminal. And I know that there are measures being considered at the state level, such as the Education Promise Act, to kind of right that. And so that's one thing that I would do, is I would be a voice, not just here locally, but in the state capitol and at the legislature, to make sure that we get what we rightfully deserve as one of the greatest cities in America, number one. Number two, I would be making difficult decisions. It's sad to me to hear all of the positions that have been cut at the Tobin School. And I have seen some of the school-based budgets. I've reviewed some of the school-based budgets. I think there's room for improvement in that process. And I think that that's something that needs to be looked at more deeply by whomever you select as your superintendent. Having said that, I also believe that when you are making difficult decisions, you have to consider your current reality. And your current reality is that we have 18,000 students that are not choosing BPS, that are going elsewhere, and we have declining enrollment. And while we may not like those data points, they are real. And so we have to, as an organization, adjust accordingly. And I think that with everyone at the table and having frank conversations about what is happening in terms of enrollment, side by side with what the needs that our children are coming to school with on a regular basis, we have to have a comprehensive plan for school consolidation. Now, I say that, and I actually watched a school committee meeting not too long ago. I want to say it was a McCormick school, where they were talking about that consolidation, or consolidation, closure, people call it different things. I think the current footprint for BPS is too big. And I think that most people would agree with that. Frankly, no one wants to give anything up. No one wants to give up a school building footage. However, we do need to right-size ourselves in a very thoughtful and deliberate way and have a long-term plan as how we're gonna do that, with the aspirational goal that we're gonna bring back many of thousands of those 18,000 kids that are not here. But we cannot do that if we're not serving the kids in our schools right now, like you so ably articulated. So we do need the social emotional supports. We do need guidance counselors, school police, a myriad of people that wrap themselves around the student body to make sure that they're successful. And there are ways to do that, but you cannot do that without finding efficiencies elsewhere. And some of those efficiencies may be a little painful. But I think the community will understand if you are making those bold decisions, if you're showing them how you're reinvesting those dollars to meet the expectations and the needs that you shared with the group just now. So that's something that I would be at the forefront of, communicating. And I also think along the lines of communication, that wasn't your question, but I would work with school site leaders and teachers and central office staff to make sure we're telling the story of Boston Public Schools, that every headline is not being written by other folks, that we are writing the narrative, because frankly, that narrative is what's going to attract children and families back to our schools and make us right-sized again.
Thank you, Maria Luisa. Abdul?
Good morning. Welcome to Boston.
Thank you.
My question is related with Islamophobia. I'm from Somalia, and I'm actually have been working a large number of Muslim community, particularly from Somali community. And I've been living in this country for almost 40 years. I've never been feel different or even had a fear in my entire life, except for the last 2 years. So we're living in a very, in a time that being a Muslim is very difficult to see yourself, you're part of this society. There's a lot of social media and everywhere that's been, pushing and negative quotation for all Muslims. That has a direct impact with our Boston Public School students. Up to now, as far as I know, though I have been worked, a number of families and their children really affected for this issue a lot. And I went to school, I did not find any BPS policy, how they address this issue. I find that teachers, principals use their own understanding, and sometimes they come short. There is no standard policy coming from BPS, and this is a direct really impacting our children on a daily basis. And even you can see that first grader feels that it's being biased based on his religion. Now we're talking about 6 years old are now experiencing that kind of bias towards, his religion in a school setting, coming from the students, and then sometimes the adults may not able how to address it, and sometimes they feel conspire with these adults and not doing anything about it. So as a new superintendent, how are you gonna address that issue? It's very compelling and it's impacting huge family and students.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Abdul, your personal experience so publicly. First and foremost, I think that children and really humans in general all seek to be accepted. That's in our DNA. We want to feel accepted. We want to feel part of something larger than ourselves. And I think that, first of all, I think that Boston and Boston Public Schools in particular, and I've been to many districts across this country, you should applaud yourself in the fact that you're having these conversations. There are many communities across America that are yet not having this conversation, Abdul. So it's rife with the kind of situation and feelings that you're sharing, but it's silenced. So the fact that Boston is willing and able and courageous enough to have these conversations that are very difficult to have publicly is a step in the right direction. So some of the work that I'm currently doing in Miami-Dade revolves around diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've actually led most of this work, even though some folks may not consider it academic in nature. It very much is academic in nature. I supervise the student services department, so all of the counseling, the crisis teams in Miami-Dade, whenever there are issues related to hate, issues related to violence, that's the team that I support. And they do God's work on earth. Some of the things that we have done to try to open the conversations to the level that they're being had here in Boston is to have some really deep conversations even at the highest of levels. Professional development for teachers on understanding implicit bias. Again, I think that folks kind of steer away from these conversations because they bring out issues related to race, to class, and to culture. And we have to understand that race, class, and culture are enormous influencers in our behaviors and in our practices, period, as human beings, whether it's at the grocery store or in front of students in a classroom. And so having professional development with not only teachers, but everyone that comes into contact, whether they're bus drivers, school police officers, any cafeteria food service workers, around understanding, because we all carry biases with us, I think is really important, and with the students. I would engage, I think you call it the SBAC, which is, I believe, the Student Body Advisory Council, to make sure that they're at the table, because they're the ones that are most affected, and make sure that that they have a voice in how the district is going to continue to address diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think it starts with signaling to students, to staffs, to families, and to the communities that there is no place for hate in Boston Public Schools. And our actions actually speak louder than our words. And so when we, as an organization, segregate children in schools or support the systems that keep students segregated in schools or within a school in classrooms or programs, we are signaling to our little babies and to our youth our biases. We're modeling that behavior. And so I think it starts with looking at ourselves introspectively as leaders in this organization to what practices we are devoting support to and devoting time to that are reinforcing those outcomes. There's a lot of great work. When I was at the Council of Great City Schools conference not too long ago last year, one of the sessions called to me in the program, and it happened to be your very own Dr. Colin Rose. And Dr. Colin Rose was speaking about the efforts here in BPS around cultural and linguistic sustainability and awareness. I think that is a very important part of the work. In Miami-Dade, several years ago, my team and I launched an initiative called Values Matter, where we as an organization selected a set of values that we feel are at the core of what we believe in. And so we celebrate different values every week. We have focus groups with students that are in the LGBTQ community. We have a program to support students that are LGBTQ. So it's not just religion, it's race, it's country of origin, it's gender identification, sexual orientation, it's a myriad of issues that really at the end, when you distill it to its most primary level, is just our need to feel included and for our need to be part of a larger group bigger than ourselves. And I would support a culture in BPS that would do just that.
Thank you for that response, Ms. Izquierdo. At this time, I think it's a great opportunity to actually engage the audience, and I believe that there may be a couple of questions that have been written in that I will randomly select one question, and so that we can get some audience engagement. And this question says, BPS has largely eliminated standardized testing. Other than that required by the state, would you keep this policy?
Easy question. So I do believe that there's a place for assessment. Any educator will tell you that there is a place for assessment, just like a doctor takes the temperature of a patient and runs a number of exams on a patient to be able to diagnose that patient's well-being. Teachers do the exact same thing in the classroom on a regular basis. Some of it, you wouldn't even notice it's a test, but it's a teacher using her or his skill to kind of get a feel for if the student is mastering content. I believe very strongly in using data to drive decision-making, not just in the academic realm, but in the operational realm of running any type of organization. I believe data in Miami-Dade is our superpower, and I say that with a lot of frequency. Having said that, I'll give you an example of what I would do and what I have done. In 2014, the state of Florida required a end-of-course exam in every course that was being given in every school district in the state. I'm going to repeat that. The state of Florida in 2014 required that every district have an end-of-course exam for every single course that is taught, K-12. And to Caitlin's question earlier, or to my response to Caitlin rather, the leadership in Miami-Dade, the superintendent, myself and others, we lobbied heavily at the state level as to what that would do, and what that would actually look like. Because I don't believe that people have malintentions. They just don't understand what that policy looks like practically in a classroom. Folks that haven't been in the classroom just really don't understand how it kind of manifests itself in a classroom. And so we educated them on that, and they made some corrections and afforded us some flexibility. That year, we looked at our own testing schedule, which was moderate. I wouldn't say it was very heavy or very light, moderate testing schedule that we had had for years. We cut 24 exams that year, 2014. The following year, we cut another 12 exams. We returned, so we shouldn't be talking about how many exams we cut, but rather how many minutes we returned to the classroom. We returned 185 minutes to classrooms for instruction, for teaching and learning instead of testing. So I think that speaks to my position on testing. There are formative assessments that are very necessary that teachers are conducting every single day. There are interim assessments that districts and large organizations should be providing to get a feel and a temperature for where resources need to be redirected, where weaknesses are, where strengths are, et cetera. And then, you have testing that is required by the state. But there's no reason why you cannot streamline them to meet mutual goals so that you don't have over-testing in our classrooms and to our students.
Great. Thank you for that answer. I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin for our next question from the panel.
With the Boston Teachers Union currently negotiating a contract and administrators in BASIS 3+ years now without a contract, can you tell us about your experience with collective bargaining, how involved you personally would plan to be in negotiations, and what you see as the role of unions in the district?
Thank you. I think, let's start with the last part of your question. So I think the role of unions is vital. I think that ultimately, teachers want a decent salary and excellent working conditions. And you know what? You can strike teachers out of that sentence. All of us at work, we want to, earn a good wage so that we can maintain our families and live a good quality of life for ourselves and for our families. And we want to go to a place of work that we feel that we're being treated like professionals and that we have good working conditions. I think at the end of the day, that's what teachers want, and I think that that's what the unions help teachers make sure that they achieve, period. In terms of working with the unions, so I gave the union president of MDCPS as one of my references. You can call her. We have a very good relationship. She and I have partnered on a number of efforts when there has been kind of unrest or just a lot of questions from parent groups and from teacher groups. So for instance, I'll give you two: recess, mandatory recess, and homework. Those are two different areas that we partnered with, herself and me personally, because there were state mandates that were coming down on the recess one. So I'll take recess first. So recess in Miami-Dade was being required in the state of Florida. There was a huge, a big group of parents that were pushing for recess in addition to physical education at all grade levels at the elementary. And you have a finite number of minutes in the day. So we worked with the union, I worked with the union personally on how do we listen to the needs and the desires of our families without compromising our instructional program, and what does that look like down to the minute. And so ensuring that the union was part of that crafting of that fix or that model was really important to me. With the homework one came similarly, organic group of voices. It was really national, so was recess to an extent, but it was a lot of families just really loudly decrying the volume of homework that children were getting. And in Miami-Dade, as in, I presume, in BTU, there's a huge kind of support around teacher academic freedom, right? A teacher is his or her owner of their craft. And so you don't want to lean in to that area so much so that the teacher's kind of like in a straitjacket that they can't exercise their academic freedom. So she and I met a number of times. We wrote articles in the paper. We recorded a video message together. We're both parents as well. And so it wasn't like a top-down mandate, this is what's gonna happen with homework. It was just more of like okay, we are appealing to you, teachers and parents alike, that this is how homework affects our children, and we need to kind of think through this as we exercise our academic freedom. In addition to that, because I oversee the Education Transformation Office, which is the Office for School Turnaround, we've had a number of MOUs that we've written with the union regarding special conditions that we would like to implement, whether it's early hiring of teachers, whether it's involuntary transfer of some staff members at some schools that are on the targeted and comprehensive list for the state. Many of them is because top-down we're required to do so by the state, and so the development of these MOUs have been vital to making sure that we can succeed in these schools. And the union was in my office when we were discussing one of the initiatives that my team and I crafted over the summer, 2 summers ago, which was Recruit, Retain, and Reward, which can provide teachers up to $12,000 in incentive to transfer to a low-performing school. It's tied to learning gains, so they're getting dollars in addition to their base salary if the students demonstrate a learning gain, and it's also tied to teacher attendance for those particular schools, and the union was part of that decision-making. So those are just some examples of how I've worked with the union in Miami-Dade.
And if you were superintendent of the Boston Public Schools, how personally involved do you foresee yourself being in contract negotiations for the teachers or the administrators?
So when I if I am selected as your superintendent, I would be very, very much involved. I have met Jessica Tang. She has been on both rounds of my initial interviews, and she seems like a very reasonable professional and someone that ultimately wants the same thing I want, which is whatever's best for children. Thank you.
Thank you. Abdul.
Thank you again. Based on my experience for the last 20 years, I've been watched a large number of our student population struggle to succeed in a BPS academic setting. And for those 20 years, we have seen different kind of leadership within superintendent who came, and everyone promised a lot of things, but we never really received all the things they promised. As a new superintendent, despite the fact the situation still on the ground remain the same, we're talking about students who came here as English language learners, interrupted their formal education, who have been diagnosed like special ed. Their parents don't speak any word of English, don't know anything how to navigate within the system. When they go schools, they feel they are actually discouraged rather than they encouraged. They feel they don't belong there. So there's a big disconnection between the top leadership and the school setting. So as a new superintendent, what kind of leadership innovation model you will propose based on hoping that this will be the first time that we've seen a new change? You talked about long-term, change. How are you gonna give us how you're gonna really planning for that?
Well, I think I'm gonna drill into EL and SPED, since you mentioned both of them for the purposes of this discussion. So for English language learners, we've done a lot of work in this regard. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all. I know that BPS has gone through kind of like an ebb and flow because of the state and decisions that the state did. I believe it was called Question 2 that kind of completely eliminated dual language or bilingual language instruction. And so you've gone through like ebbs and flows in terms of the programming for those students. But I think a couple of things are needed, right? The first thing I would do in your EL population is try to get a really good sense of what the data is telling us. How long are English language learners sitting as classified as English language learners? That's something that we did in Miami-Dade when I first became CAO. Like one of the very first things was, okay, like I know because I was a principal and that was something that I did on a regular basis, was monitor my ESOLs and my ESOL students and what levels they were in and how quickly they were moving out, right? But when you looked at it at the aggregate level as a district, you were talking tens of thousands of students. So in MDCPS, we have 70,000 English language learners. What I did with them in particular, what my team did, was we started looking at kids that were in ESOL for more than X number of years. We know the research is really compelling that it takes 3 to 7 years for students to truly acquire academic literacy in another language, right? Not just be able to street speak, but academic literacy. However, there are a myriad of things that you can do to accelerate that, right? And so one of the things we did was look again at the standards and what the students' actual journey was in these classrooms. And we have an ESOL program, which is for English language acquisition, and then next to that, it's a double block. They have language arts through ESOL, so developmental language arts. So they're learning, they're having access to the standards on grade level, and they're learning English. So those two things, those two teachers, sometimes it's the same teacher, work together to make sure that it's a coherent kind of experience for their children. We looked at the materials that were being utilized, and many times we were finding just watered down materials for these children. So making sure that both, and I can say this for both English learners as well as students that are differently abled, both of those sets of students, whomever comes into this role wants to look to make sure that they are interacting with the highest quality materials possible and that they're being held to high standards. The family piece cannot be understated. So in MDCPS, we have a program called the Bilingual Parent Outreach Program, which serves to help support the parents in these communities, like my mom, who didn't speak English when I was very little. She's very fluent now, and she would kill me if she heard me say that she didn't speak English. Mom, I know you speak perfect English. She's watching. However, the making sure that our families have, I know that I think you are starting to have or pop up, I believe they're called welcome centers. And so those centers, those hubs in different communities that welcome families in, whether they're already families of BPS or prospective families for BPS, making sure that all of the resources are there at their disposal, not only to educate their child, but to educate the parents. So I think you call it the parent university, we call it the parent academy, really making sure that we're serving those two subgroups of families really well through that parent university. If we're not, rebranding it, resourcing it, and making sure that it's vital. On the SPED end, and I meant to mention it earlier, and I'm glad I'm getting another opportunity, is this piece on inclusion. I think I read somewhere, and don't quote me please, but I think I read somewhere that there was a 13-year plan for inclusion in BPS. Like, any plan that's 13 years is too long. So a 13-year plan to have, what would be considered a benchmark percent of students that are differently abled, that are spending time with their non-disabled peers is too long. And so one of the things that we did in MDCPS for both ESOL as well as SPED is look at those committees that sit at the school site and are making decisions about reclassification. So making sure that in EL, for instance, the teachers were scared to exit the students because, number one, they felt they cared about the kids and they didn't want the kids to fail. So this whole notion of, well, I'm gonna hold Juan and Maria in my class for just one more year because they're not ready. That's not a teacher having bad intentions. That's a teacher trying to nurture. But in the end, you're holding the child back and not kind of releasing them into a gen ed environment, which is gonna push them to succeed on grade level. So looking at those people that are sitting at the table and educating them and supporting them is just as important as supporting the student. In SPED, we did the exact same thing. So every year when we're looking at IEPs and we're reevaluating our students, are we really looking at the least restrictive environment? One of the first things I would do in BPS is take a really deep dive with the specialists that are here at the central office and at the school sites, create like a task force to take a look at what children are being in a separate instructional kind of environment. And those students that are in a separate environment, are their IEPs really calling for them to be in a separate environment? Now, I understand that there are models of implementation that the union and the district are discussing or are working through. And so looking at those models, is there just one model? Are there other ways of biting at that apple to make sure that the students are in gen ed as to the level that they can be in the least restrictive environment for at least 80% of the school day, but that the teachers are supported in serving those students? Last year alone, because inclusion is something that we're working hard at, we haven't necessarily cracked that nut yet. Last year alone, we mainstreamed an additional, we have 37,000 SPED students. We have 1,882 more kids this year in a gen ed setting than we had last year. And to me, that's a step in the right direction.
Right. Thank you, Ms. Izquierdo. I'm looking at the time. We have 35 minutes left, and in the interest of time, I would ask almost kind of like a 2-minute per question, per answer, so that we can get to some of the questions, and there are a number of audience questions as well that I would love to get to. So, Vanessa, if you want to give us the next question.
Sure. Mrs. Izquierdo, I represent a community development corporation in Boston who for many years have worked in partnership with BPS in schools and in different initiatives. I would like to ask you, what is your experience in working with community partners? What are the challenges that you foresee or that you have experienced in this work, and how you have overcome those challenges? And if you could give us some specific examples, I would appreciate it.
In 2 minutes. So I'll just mention a few and then we'll go to challenges. So in my work and in the work of the district that I'm currently at, we have a myriad of partners in the community, but I will say this, not as many as there are in Boston. And that's wonderful. That is an asset to any superintendent and to any school district that needs to be exploited. And I use that word specifically because it really does need to be exploited. We have great partners, but it pales in comparison. So for some of the things that we're doing, we rely heavily on public-private partnerships. We have, to your, I guess, more along the lines of what you do, we have partnered with the Children's Trust, which is a taxing authority that has resources to support education of our youth. We have partnered with Career Source, with JP Morgan, Chase, and Royal Caribbean, and our school district foundation to provide students with summer youth internship opportunities to the tune of $4.6 million. So those entities have come together, kind of like you all have with, I believe, the Boston Foundation and the Boston Compact and so on and so forth, and come together to really attack a priority, which is to provide students in job-embedded experiences in fields that they're interested in exploring. Those are paid internships in 784 companies. Last year, we had 2,600 students participate in that. I think it's great for our community, it's great for our kids, and it's something that I would love to, have here. I know that there's some of that, but to increase that even more. We have a project with Sprint, where Sprint is providing us with cell phones. It's called the Sprint Million Project, 1 million cell phones across this country. We started with 9th graders, we're up to 10th graders this year. The children are given, any child that's on free and reduced lunch gets a free cell phone. And one would say, well, what do they need a cell phone for? More screen time. But the reason we're giving those kids those cell phones is so that when they go home to their digital desert, that they don't have internet at home or a computer, they can actually use that phone for research, for homework, and more often than not, as a mobile hotspot. So that's really changing the landscape of student instruction and student access and opportunity. We partner with, my superintendent has what he calls CEO briefings, where he meets on a monthly basis. He has a lunch. This is a practice that I would absolutely steal from him. I'm sure he'll let me, which is to meet with by thematic areas, different sectors of the community, CEOs in different sectors of the community. It's an informal meeting, but you get to speak about the good work that you're doing in your district, but also hearing what they're hearing in their respective sectors. So it could be from hospitality and tourism to banking to information technology. Every month it's a different set of CEOs. I would continue that practice. We're working with the city of Miami, a la a program that is happening in San Francisco, or has been happening in San Francisco, which is the college savings accounts. The city of Miami is going to be giving us seed money for every student that's on free and reduced lunch so that we can open college savings accounts for these children and teach the parents how to earn dollars, if you will, through philanthropy, where they, let's say they participate in, truly participate, not just, show up, but participate in their students' development. Let's say it's a project that they're working with the children on or coming to school for quarterly meetings with the teacher, et cetera, and they can gain dollars in their college savings accounts. And that really sends two messages. Number one, it incentivizes parents to invest and engage in their child's education, but it also tells the kid, we believe you're worthy of this savings account, and the research shows that children with college savings accounts as low as $500 are 3 times as likely to go to college. So that's a couple. I can go on and on. I can talk about our involvement with, we just started a family support services unit under my division, which is supporting families across our district, whether they're special ed, EL, or general ed. And also we use Title I dollars very effectively. We have a community involvement specialist at every school, which is the person that kind of is the liaison between the school and the businesses, local small businesses around that school that can support that school in micro ways that can have huge impact.
Thank you, Ms. Izquierdo. I'm sure a lot of parents will appreciate a free cell phone and a bank account. So, Anthony.
Thank you. Would you talk about, you mentioned college as one endpoint for a student graduating from high school. Would you talk a little bit about your experience and perspective on post-secondary pathways other than the traditional four-year liberal arts programming?
Sure. So I am a very strong believer in the power of career and technical education. We have grown our career and technical education program in Miami-Dade threefold, fourfold in the last couple of years. It has come, for me, the important piece on that is not just what some folks would call vocational education, which doesn't necessarily end with a certificate or an accreditation of some sort for children, but actual courses that will yield an industry certification. Many times students don't know that there are high-wage jobs that can be attained. I had a conversation with a student the other day, and we were talking about welding. And he had no idea what the market was for welders in Miami. And when students start understanding that there are great opportunities to earn more than a fair living wage through other pathways, they become very interested. And so working with the business community has been vital. We work with the Chamber of Commerce and the Beacon Council, which is the Beacon Council is like the advisor, the economic advisor to the community. And so there are several industries that our local economy in Miami-Dade prioritize because the workforce is short and is needed, and there's a high demand for these jobs. So whether it's hospitality and tourism, whether it's banking, whether it's information technology, trade and logistics has been a big one for us now. And so what we do is we listen to that. We keep our ear really close to that ground, and we develop relationships with those folks so that then we build programming around that. And so I would even say to you that if I came into this role or when I come into this role, that would be one of the first things I would do is really get connected to what are those booming areas, and then what programs do we have in our schools. Now, I don't believe, because you're asking me what I believe, I don't necessarily feel that they need to be isolated programs, like, oh, vocational ed is only in that building over there in that one school. I think that there should be opportunities via academies across all 125 schools, or particularly the high schools rather, to make sure that kids can access them. They don't have to traverse town to go to automotive or trade and logistics or nursing, that there are those programs in their communities based on need, number one, local economy, and also based on interest of students and family.
Great, thank you. I'm going to select another random question from the audience. This one reads, based on your knowledge of our student demographics, what is the one population you have cultural competence with, and one where you are still learning? How do you approach that learning process?
So some of this might be in my closing remarks, but I'll say it again or before. I think one of the areas that I would be learning, first of all, I want to say this, and it's in my closing remarks, but I'll repeat myself, is I know that there's been some conversation around, oh, she's an academician. She's an academician, she's an academician, she's a one-trick pony. And so I would say to you that I'm not. I play a very vital role in the leadership team in Miami-Dade. I am a thought partner to the superintendent of schools, and I am involved in 99.9% of all decision-making, academic or not, in MDCPS. So having said that, that involves anything from facilities, where I played a pivotal role in the 2012 referendum that we floated to our residents with more than a 70% approval rating to a la build BPS to really renovate and modernize our school facilities. And so now, speaking to Anthony's question around programming, we're looking at what kind of facilities and what they need to look like in order to align the buildings and the classroom spaces to what the children will be doing in them. So facilities will be one of them. I will speak to the budgeting process and the fact that I oversee a $200 million budget and 1,200 employees within my bureau. However, I am at the table when decisions are being made and negotiating very strongly with my colleagues around the priorities that I bring to the table, because they are the heart and soul of the school system, which is teaching and learning and student achievement. And so how we prioritize all of the needs of the organization around that pivotal number one goal, which is student achievement, is something that I'm integrally involved in. So I would say, for me, the biggest learnings, which is your question, would really be to get to know the people in Boston and really get to build relationships with Boston and the folks that have resources and a voice in how we impact student lives each and every day.
And I'm going to ask this question just because you mentioned facilities, and it's one of the questions I believe I saw here somewhere, which is this one. In Boston, we are experiencing decaying and mismanaged facilities that are aging. What is your experience with major facility repair and upkeep?
I'll share an anecdote. Well, number one, I was a principal at a school. I was an assistant principal for 10 years at a school that was deemed a historic landmark. So it was also similar to a school in your district, also deemed you couldn't have children in it. So we had to move kids out of the building, and then working with the municipality and with the school district to continue teaching and learning in this building while we were mitigating the situation at hand. It had been built, if I remember correctly, there was a certain level of salt in the material that was built the building, and so it was eroding at a very rapid pace. And so that was an interesting, we had town halls, we had parents coming to the school. We were very open and transparent during that process. It was difficult. We had standardized testing occurring while we were relocating classrooms. So I have experience at the school site level dealing with just that. At the central office level, well, and then when I became a principal at Flagler Elementary, school was very old. It was 50 years old. I think its fourth principal, and it didn't have the spaces that it really needed to have for 21st century learning. So at that time, this is before we had a bond at the district level, I used my charm and my power of persuasion to make sure that, and my budget, my Title I budget specifically, to make sure that we remodeled all the classrooms so that we had interactive whiteboards, so that we had computers for teachers. And I phased that in because I didn't have enough money to do it in year one. So I kind of figured out where my biggest priorities were school-wide. And when I left there, every classroom had an interactive whiteboard. Every classroom had at a minimum of 3 to 4 computers. It was very modern. And I also got a new building, and I managed the construction of that building. And I negotiated from the cookie cutter building that they wanted to give me to what I really wanted it to do. So I had them, the architects and the facilities office, change some of the classroom spaces to what we needed for that school. And then at the central office level, I was involved from the get-go in the GOB bond, Proposition 222. I worked in that campaign. I worked really hard at something that we don't really like to do in Miami-Dade County, which is show our cupboards, right? You have people over, you don't want people to see underneath your cupboards. You kind of put everything away and make your home as nicely presentable as possible. And I knew that we needed to have the press come in, walk the buildings with us, and have the press show the leaky roofs, have the press see the classrooms without air conditioning. And it was something that kind of was against our DNA to do, but we knew that that's the only way that the community and the folks that were going to vote on that proposition were really going to understand the needs that we had in our school district.
Great, thank you. We have 20 minutes left, so we've gained a little bit of time, which is great. So I'll read one more question from the audience if the panel will indulge me, and then we'll come back to the panel. And this question reads, with BPS support, some schools participate in the Massachusetts Consortium for Innovative Educational Assessment. MCIEA works with teachers and administrators to implement performance assessments and much richer accountability indicators. Would you support the district moving towards full participation in MCIEA, which again is the Massachusetts Consortium for Innovative Educational Assessment?
Well, first, I think I would need to brush up on MCIEA. I'm not one to endorse something that I'm not fully knowledgeable about. What I will speak about, and maybe it's along those lines, is the Mass Core curricula. I feel very strongly that when you look at the data for BPS, there's a tick, there's improvement, but we need to take that improvement with a grain of salt. I've mentioned recently increases in graduation rates with which many applaud, but when you peel that back and you look at what that means, maybe there's a whole lot of room for improvement there in terms of, are they really college ready or are they just college eligible? I want to say that 38% or so of the students that do enter college from BPS require a remedial course. So I would submit to you that then they're not college ready if they need a remedial course. I believe that the latest stat is 55% of the students, which was applauded, 55% of the students are finishing within 6 years, attaining that post-secondary credential. But when you drill deeper, and I've mentioned this before, I'm big on data, when you drill deeper, you see that that 77% at the exam schools, that's like 47% at the selective schools, and it's 38% at the open enrollment schools, at the 18 high schools. So that speaks to me, right? That we need to look at what we're doing in schools in general, K-12, but in high school, in terms of the sequencing and the requirements for graduation. When I tell folks, friends and colleagues, no, in Boston, different high schools have different high school graduation requirements. They're like dumbified. They look at me like, what? These are educators, long time educators. And I'm like, yeah, they have different standards. And so I think we need to ask those questions. They're hard questions to ask because everyone's always scared of lifting the bar, right? If you lift the bar, then what's gonna happen to our graduation rates? But really, we need to think about what's gonna happen to our children. And so that conversation is something that I'm really looking forward to having. And if MCIEA is an avenue to have those conversations, I look forward to engaging.
Great, thank you. I'm going to open it back up to the panel to see if there are any burning platform questions that haven't been asked that you want to ask. Kayla?
A group of Tobin teachers were recently awarded a Teacher Leadership Fund grant to focus on attendance. We endeavored to explore this topic as it is an issue of primary importance to teachers and schools. Educators and administrators are devoting an incredible amount of time and resources to all facets of the attendance work. We found that our district resources are thin and our supervisors of attendance are overstretched. With attendance now being an accountability measure and schools being held harmful for absenteeism, can you speak to some initiatives that you have taken in your previous positions and what supports you would put in place for families, teachers, and schools to improve our attendance numbers?
Thank you for asking me that question. I'm actually really happy you asked me that question. Attendance to me, at least from my perspective, looking from the outside in, is a challenge for BPS. It is not part of the accountability structure in the state of Florida, but I will tell you what we've done locally in MDCPS. When I did look at the attendance rates for BPS, I want to say that the average number of days that students are out is about 15, and that's a lot. And so I also don't look at data just statically. I benchmark it against, others, right? So when you look at Massachusetts, I think it's like 10. So clearly there is a lower level of attendance in BPS than in Massachusetts in general. And I would do that with any metric, right? Coming in, how do we compare in everything? And that will be kind of like little hotspots that will pop themselves up that will kind of lead to where the work needs to be done. So I'm really happy to hear that a group of teachers are kind of putting their head around that problem, because it is a problem. One of the things that we've done, again, not because we had to, it's not in the accountability formula. As the CAO, I want to say maybe like 5 years ago, I started ranting and raving that we could have the best teachers, we could have the best textbooks, we could have the best curricula, but if the children are not in the seat, I can't do anything with that. Like, we will not be able to move academically. And so we wrapped our head around it as a cabinet, and we have a process that we call Datacom. We actually kind of stole it. In education, we like to borrow. So we borrowed it from Giuliani Comstat in New York, which looks at crime rates. What we were looking at was different data points that affect the learning environment and student outcomes at schools. So a la Comstat, we have a process 3 to 4 times a year where we bring our lowest performing schools to the table. The principals come with their leadership teams, and we look at different metrics. And one of the key metrics, besides progress monitoring, besides their standard assessment rates, their literacy rates, their numeracy rates, all of that, is we look at attendance. We look at student attendance. We look at teacher attendance as well. And on the student end, what the district was doing for many years was we were looking at the average attendance rate. That, you have your attendance bulletin that runs every day, and the school has 92.5% attendance. That's it. What we started to do, at my insistence, is breaking that down into number of looking at truancy. So how many kids are absent 0 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 15? And then having very specific strategies for those different buckets of children. And what came out was sometimes the schools that were getting all of our attendance attention were not really the ones that needed it the most. You had some schools that had high averages, but when you peeled it back, they had a little pocket of really truant children. And that's what you really want to get to. So what I want to get to is I would want, and I hope that you and the team that you're working with for attendance looks at this, is those truancy rates, those persistently absent kids. And then things that we've done in order to address that is we've built in wraparound services at our lowest performing schools, where we have also the community involvement specialist. We have parent truancy intervention meetings. So we call parents in. We give them resources because we're trying to get to the root cause. What's the root cause? Does a student have an allergy that's causing them to be absent every day? Is it a busing situation? So we understand clearly that it's not a one-size-fits-all when it comes to attendance. You got to get to the root cause and then fix the root cause and provide supports to that family to mitigate those.
Great. Thank you. Abdul?
I have a follow-up question based on what you really talked about it. Exactly, that's the problem. When is they even find this chronic absentees, particular students? They should investigate, they should know what's going on, they should be able to talk to the parents. I'm gonna give you a classic example. A refugee family who come here usually become immediately homeless. And when they become homeless, they become, going in shelter. They have no choice. They have been moving from place to places. Mm-hmm. So they come to the school. Sometimes they may not come to the school because they have been, transferred into outside Boston area. So the parents, again, the same parents I said earlier, Somali, don't speak the language, don't know nothing about the system. So their children being, flagged, they have chronic absentees, and guess what happened? They received a letter from the court. That is now pushing this child first time. We're talking about 10 years old. Went to the court. I was with him. Now being assigned a public defender, and the lawyer was saying that just accept it, we're gonna put you on probation. And I said, what's going on here? So this is the classic example I'm talking about, the disconnection between the top leadership and what's going on the schools. So I hope that this kind of things is not acceptable. I mean, if it's BPS policy, I think it's not fair. Putting these children, pipeline from school to prison kind of things is not being accepted. So I hope that will be another example for we need leadership that can change.
Paul, may I just respond very quickly? I know we're short on time, but in Miami-Dade, we have 5,500 students that are homeless. The homeless students are served through a program called Project Upstart that I supervise. In Project Upstart, what we do is when students, we have a liaison at every school for homelessness. Sometimes it's a counselor, sometimes it's a teacher. It depends on the school. The school selects who the liaison is. And that person is the one that alerts the central office so that we can start kicking in our resources. Our students, even when they move and they're in a shelter maybe or a temporary housing situation, they continue to go to their same school. And that's very important for us. We transport those children. We do not let them be transient during the day when they should be learning. And so that's really important to us. And also, you know, when you have a lot of students that might be undocumented, and this notion of school is a safe place, and when you arrive here, we're not asking you for any kind of paperwork related to your citizenship. We are here to support you, to help you. Inclusive schools that are including children and making them feel warm and happy, going back to being happy and thriving in their traditional school.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Izquierdo. We have come to the part of the process where we'll give you a couple of minutes for your closing statement. And I believe I've gotten the 3-minute notice, so.
Sure. Some of it I've already said, but I wanted to thank all of you again for taking time off of your busy schedules to be here today. This is a really important decision that the community and the school committee ultimately will be making, and I am just very flattered and honored to be even considered among the candidates. Fortunately, in Boston, there are great, exceptional universities and partner organizations, as I've mentioned before. There's no shortage of research, of data, of analysis on the what. What needs to be attacked? What is a challenge? Where are the opportunities for improvement? I think the question that we need to start asking ourselves is the how. And in the last couple of months, you all have been asking yourselves the who. Who should be the leader? And who will lead this district to reach the aspirational goals that it's set for itself? And I submit to you today that you're going to be very hard pressed to find a candidate that has that fits the bill. And I believe I fit the bill because I've done this work, I've done it successfully, and I've done it at scale. I have the experience of working with children, teachers, parents, and community stakeholders to craft a collective vision for what the future looks like and to ensure that all students, regardless of zip code, have access to a high-quality education within and even having a very broad choice and academies program, but one that affords them the access, the opportunity, and the support needed to achieve at the highest levels. MDCPS is the 4th largest district in America. It's home to 70,000 English language learners. It's home to 37,000 differently abled students. It's home to 5,500 homeless students. Students come from 35 different municipalities, 100 different countries of origin, speaking 56 different languages. I know that I've read a lot about how diverse Boston is, but I submit to you that I come from a very diverse, large urban school district as well. My life's work has been to deliver improved academic outcomes for students, particularly traditionally marginalized students, whether they were the at-risk students that I served as a first-year teacher in middle school in Miami-Dade, whether it was the middle school that I served for 10 years under 4 different principals in a school that was having extreme changes in its demographics, and it was strife with racial tension, and is a super high-performing middle school today with a magnet program that my team and I crafted and left it with. Whether I was an elementary school principal in a very impoverished area of Little Havana where I grew up with a critical mass of English language learners and immigrant families. And that school became the shining star for turnaround in MDCPS. So much so that a school that had been a D was a AAA. In Florida, they grade schools. And it met all of the components of No Child Left Behind, meaning that every single subgroup in that school was being serviced appropriately and they were demonstrating gains. So much so that the Commissioner of Education in the state of Florida asked me to become the director for school turnaround efforts in South Florida, serving Miami-Dade, Palm Beach, and Monroe counties. When we did that, We were able to, in our first year, we had 73% of the schools improved by at least one letter grade. I want to say 38% of them improved by 2 in just 1 year's worth of time. As the CAO in Miami-Dade County Public Schools, I sit at the helm of this organization in its academic functionality. And I sit at the helm during a time when the district has received its first A rating from the state of Florida. It has never been an A before. 98% of the schools in Miami-Dade are rated A, B, or C. When we first started doing this work, my team and I, there were 42 Ds and 9 F schools. Today, there are 5 Ds, there are 0 F schools. We've eliminated F schools for the last 2 school years. More importantly, we are sitting with the highest graduation rate in the history of MDCPS at 84%. When you exclude charters from that calculation, it rises to 89. 89% of our students are graduating college and career ready. And we've been able to close the achievement gap in terms of graduation since 2011 by having our Black and English language learners close that gap in graduation in half, and our economically disadvantaged and our differently abled students by 2/3. I have the experience, the expertise, and the outcomes to lead Boston Public Schools. I come here to listen, to learn, and to lead. And together we can ensure that BPS shifts from being a system of schools to the preeminent school district that ensures that students have access, opportunity, and support to graduate college, career, and life ready, so that the city that birthed public education can be the home to the first urban school district in America to effectively close the achievement gap. Through equity, opportunity, and innovation, this work can get done by focusing on engaging all learners through a relevant, rigorous, and standards-based curriculum, by attracting, retaining, and rewarding talent at all levels of the organization, by capitalizing on Mayor Walsh's Build BPS plan to transform learning spaces into modern facilities that enable the 21st century needs of our students, which is communication, collaboration, creativity, and critical thinking. By enlisting partners and engaging families to enable the success of all students, and by executing strategic operational practices that support students, schools, staff, and families. But let me make myself crystal clear. Although I am an experienced leader and educator, I have great ideas regarding ways to address the many challenges facing BPS today. I do not intend to come in with a set of preconceived solutions. I will listen to you, I will learn, and I will lead. I also understand that for some, having a local talent or someone who's been a long-term superintendent may be preferable, but here's what you need to know about me. While not born in Boston, I grew up in a community that shares many of its characteristics. It is extremely diverse. I am not a Bostonian, but I will be. I may be leaving warmer weather, but I would be gaining great sports teams. I'm a sports enthusiast. And we're better to do that than here in Boston. I am someone who commits to my community, and with my family, I would be building deep roots here in Boston. I have not relocated multiple times, chasing a title. In fact, I'll be very honest with you, as I was with the search committee. I was not seeking a superintendency just yet. I have a freshman in high school, and it was my intention to wait until she graduated to go ahead and then consider taking that step. The only reason I am here before you today is because when the conversation and idea of coming to Boston started to emanate, I quickly realized that it was too good to be true for me. It's a very challenging role. There are a lot of challenges ahead, but I do believe that my skill set and my experience and the outcomes that I've achieved just are a perfect match to what is needed here in Boston Public Schools. This is the superintendency for me. And it just didn't come 3 years down the pike. It came now. And so I am committed because it just feels right. I'm much more than an academician. I'm a problem solver. I'm an untier of knots. I'm a uniter of people. And I'm, more importantly, a systems thinker. And I think these qualities supersede geography, residency, and title. There are two things that I've done throughout my career regardless of title. Number one, put children at the center of all decision making, and number two, to far exceed anyone's expectations. As superintendent of BPS, you can expect nothing different. Truth is, this is a job that I know I can do, but I know I can only do it with your trust and support. I think all of us know that having someone stay in this role for a meaningful amount of time is best for all teachers and students. That's my vision and my greatest desire. If you choose me for this job, I commit to you that I will work tirelessly for all students in all zip codes. This is a defining moment for Boston Public Schools and for the city of Boston. And I'd love to be a proud part of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Izquierdo, for your words. Thank you to the panelists, my fellow panelists, for your questions. Thank you to the audience. And just as a reminder that you can email superintendent search at bostonpublicschools.org to provide us with feedback. Thank you again. And good luck with the rest of your day.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate your answers.